Throughout basically the entirety of NBA history, when you thought of great defenders, you were usually thinking of players in two very separate categories. Usually elite rim protectors like Hakeem Olajuwon or Tim Duncan, or lockdown perimeter defenders like Scottie Pippen or Gary Payton. But it was pretty rare to have both of those skills blended into one player, let alone someone that was able to do both at a high level. But then, in the mid-2010s, the Warriors made a decision.
The Golden State Warriors select Draymond Green.
Blocked by Green! Now, what a block by Draymond Green! Green. Green stole the ball! Green stole the ball! Oh, blocked by Green! He did it again! What a play by Draymond! That ball knocked away! Draymond kept it! Who's there right there to contest it? But Draymond Green. Green, excellent defensive play.
I think I'm the best defender to ever play this game, and I'll put myself up against anyone.
Even though Draymond was pretty much always known as an elite defender, most people would consider his absolute peak to be between 2015 and 2018, as this was the point where he was in his athletic prime. Pairing his physical abilities to his otherworldly defensive IQ meant that he could do just about anything on that end of the floor. Standing at 6'6", Draymond was an undersized power forward in terms of height, and therefore was often underestimated by bigger offensive players, especially in the post. But even though he was shorter than most fours at the time, he made up for it with his core strength and 7'1" wingspan, both of which would quickly turn the matchups in his favor. And this unique ability would be instrumental in the Warriors deciding to try lineups with a 6'6" Draymond Green at the center position, because not only did you need to worry about this, when they got the stop, he was also one of the best playmakers on the other end, especially in transition. And this was during a time where a lot of front court players were just too slow to be able to keep up with these fast breaks. It was an absolute nightmare of a matchup. But going back to the post plays, during the 2015-2016 season, which was the first season the NBA started tracking post-up data, players posted up Draymond an average of 2.2 possessions per game, tied for the fourth most in the NBA, and teams scored on these possessions just 33% of the time. These numbers put him in the 89th percentile for post defense that season, which is comparable to many other bigger players at the center position, such as Pau Gasol, Tim Duncan, and Greg Monroe. And this trend continued into the next couple seasons, including 2017, the season in which he won Defensive Player of the Year. While he was better in other areas on the defensive end, his post defense was still among the best in the league. And on the topic of his defense in the area around the basket, we also need to talk about his rim protection, which is a weird thing to be talking about with a player that's 6'6", but during his peak, he was consistently one of the best rim protectors in the league, averaging around 4.5 defended shots at the rim during his peak years, and holding opponents between 50 and 55% on these shots during that time, which is a mark consistent again with a lot of the top rim protecting bigs around the NBA. Some of these coming from those post-ups we talked about earlier, but others coming from his defensive rotations. Around this time, Draymond became arguably the best roamer in the NBA. Having a rim protector like Andrew Bogut on the floor with him at times definitely helped, but a lot of the time where he was actually playing this role, he was the main paint protector. Take this play for example. The Blazers tried to put JaVale McGee in pick and roll as he was the most vulnerable matchup on the floor, especially guarding in space on the perimeter. Because of Dame's shooting ability, JaVale has to come all the way out to the three-point line, at which point Dame attacks downhill. Draymond starts dropping, which forces Dame to make a decision. Noah Vonleh starts cutting, but Draymond positions himself in such a way where he's able to cut off the drive and the attempt at the rim after the pass. This is a skill that he would become known for during this time, as it was pretty rare for a player of any size to be able to stop the drive and get back to the rim all in around 1 second. Something very similar happened in a play earlier this series, except this time it was a fast break and he was the only player back, leading to one of the craziest craziest defensive stops possibly in the history of the game. Plays like this were not that uncommon either, leading people to believe that he was the best help defender in the league for most of these seasons, as the ground he was able to cover and his ability to map out the possessions in real time was unlike pretty much any other player in the league at that time. Draymond in this time span averaged 1.3 blocks per game at 6'6", most of them coming close to the basket, and a good amount of them coming against players that were taller than him. But his wingspan was also instrumental in his ability to block shots from smaller players, because it meant that it was easier for him to stay as vertical as possible while still being able to get a piece of the ball, which was noteworthy and important, as smaller players are naturally going to get more love from the refs in these types of situations. So by extending his reach, he minimized his chances as much as humanly possible of being called for fouls. But whether it was against a guard or a center, most of these blocks were a result of his otherworldly defensive rotations. And this brings us to the topic of general off-ball defense. This was the area where he set himself apart from everyone else in the NBA. During his peak, he was a master of reading the offense and being able to blow up plays. Take this play for example. Russ runs a pick and roll with Steven Adams, and Draymond breaks off of Taj Gibson to immediately blitz Adams with Zaza Pachulia. Zaza recovers back to Taj, and Adams gives the ball back to Russ. This time, Russ rejects a screen, which gets Klay Thompson out of position due to Westbrook's speed, and Draymond is forced to drop again. He forces Westbrook to give the ball up, and Taj is open this time, so Steven Adams lobs the ball in. But as soon as Draymond lands from the first jump, he's able to jump again and break the pass up. Or this play, where Jeff Teague has the slower Andrew Bogut on a switch, so he attacks downhill. But this is a point where Bogut is still very much in range to get a block on this layup attempt, so Draymond is able to make the split-second decision of playing him for a pass instead of a shot, which leads to him breaking up a drop-off pass to the cutting Al Horford. A theme that you'll see a lot from Draymond, especially in plays like these, is the fact that he would very rarely be out of position or overplay something. His level of awareness was so high that it seemed like he was just always in the best possible position to be able to get a stop, and this was due to his on-court coaching. Many people know Draymond as a player that talks a lot in game, and while some of that may be trash talk towards the other team or absolutely berating an official, most of his talking is actually with his teammates to put everyone in the ideal spots for a defensive stop. We saw a lot of this in 2018 as the Warriors became more connected on defense, and especially in their Western Conference Finals series against the Houston Rockets. With Steph Curry being the weakest defender on the floor, Houston was dead set on trying to involve him in as many actions as possible. Steph had struggled with foul trouble in both matchups with Houston in 2018 and 2019, so the Warriors did what they could to keep him out of as many compromising situations as possible. Steph already has one foul here, so Houston immediately tries to go at this matchup, knowing that Steph usually plays less physical when he knows he's about to be in foul trouble. Draymond sees this right away, and he breaks off of Chris Paul to put himself in help position. He tells Kevon Looney to stay home, and is able to rotate over and alter Harden's shot. A little bit later in the game, Harden is seeking the Steph switch again, so they pre-switch off ball when PJ goes to set the pick. Houston counters this by having PJ rotate over to the corner and having Chris Paul set the screen instead. Klay does a good job of fighting over the first time, but gets caught on the re-screen. The second that happens, Draymond starts dropping off of PJ to cut off the drive, and he's actually telling Klay to rotate to the corner. But seeing that Chris Paul is playing very legal offense, he realizes that he needs to be the one to rotate. But with the speed that he recognized the situation, he's still able to get a decent contest off. This was a nightly thing. Everyone talks about the incredible offense of this team, but this Warriors team was always at the top of the league in defense as well. And this was what truly set them apart from everyone else at the time. No team in the modern era had ever combined this level of offensive talent with a defense that makes even MVP caliber players second guess themselves on nearly every single play. And it wasn't just the Rockets. Here's a play where DeAndre Jordan has Klay on a mismatch, so Klay and Draymond instantly call for a switch because they know they're about to lob the ball in there. That's what happens, and Draymond ends up getting a hand on the pass. As we mentioned earlier, Draymond in the post is no longer a favorable matchup, so they start looking for other options. Gallinari starts cutting, but Draymond is playing him for that as well, and DeAndre isn't able to get the pass through the outstretched arm of Dre. During the 2016-17 2015 season, Draymond won Defensive Player of the Year while leading the league in steals with 2 per game. A lot of the steals that he got during his peak were a result of help defense, usually in situations where the offensive player would be driving to the rim with someone on his hip, where Draymond was able to step in and swipe at the ball. While this isn't entirely Draymond, he still had the skill to be able to time these strips perfectly nearly every time. This play is an example of his superhuman IQ paired with that ability, where he jumps at the pass, and while Tony Allen is driving on Iguodala, it takes Draymond a split second to look back, process the play, and quickly reach in and get a hand on the ball all in one motion. This was another factor that made him so dangerous, because it meant that at the same time you were warding off your primary defender on a drive, you also had to have even more awareness of where the help was coming from. But while he did get a lot of strips like these, he got a lot of on-ball strips as well, which brings us to his on-ball defense and plays in isolation. Traditionally, when you got a front court player switched onto you, it was more than likely gonna be a blow-by situation. Power forwards and centers are usually slower, especially on the perimeter, and so it was common knowledge to try to get that mismatch and go to work. But throughout history, you have those very rare, select few players where this just wasn't an option. Draymond was one of those players. During his peak, he was able to consistently stay in front of a lot of ball handling guards, and this goes back to his awareness and IQ. A big reason for his perimeter defense being so locked down during these seasons was because of his ability to beat even some of the fastest players in the league to their spots. In isolation, the 2015-16 season was his absolute peak, at least in seasons that were tracked. He led the league in defended ISO possessions per game at 2.4, and teams shot 31% from the field in these situations, putting Draymond in the 85th percentile for isolation defenders. His marks suffered a steady decline over the next couple seasons as the Warriors adopted a more team-oriented, switch-heavy defensive scheme with the addition of Kevin Durant. But it wasn't just isolation. In pick and rolls, he was a nightmare to deal with. That's because they usually went one of two ways. Either he was the dropper, and he would be able to make split-second reads on which player to pick up, or he was the primary defender, with the ball handler trying to get him switched off, where his screen navigation was elite as well. There weren't really a lot of answers that teams had for this, not just because of the abilities of Draymond, but also the backline defensive rotation that he would have waiting behind him. Usually a mix of Andrew Bogut, Festus Ezeli, or in the KD years, JaVale McGee, all of whom were a big interior presence and would often negate any advantage created during these possessions, and it was right back to pick and roll all over again. Even in situations where it was just an isolation and he did get beat, he had few instances where he was able to use those long arms to reach around and strip the ball from behind. Whether he wants to admit it or not, he does seem to have a lot of control over exactly where his hands are. This is true even in plays like these, where he's constantly moving his arms around in order to take away as many of the player's options as possible before just stripping the ball away. He would also be able to do this when the player he was defending actually caught the ball. His hands were so quick that he could easily catch players off guard that weren't primary ball handlers, and therefore weren't used to this type of defense and quick hands from someone at the same position as them. Take this play, where Marc Gasol catches the ball up top, and Draymond instantly pressures him in order to make him make a decision. This is so that the larger Gasol won't be able to just easily take him into the post. Marc, understandably flustered, attempts to put the ball on the floor, where Draymond's hands are waiting to knock the ball away. This is what happens when a player can truly guard all 5 positions, and no single play showcases this better than this possession in the 2017 playoffs. So the play starts out with Draymond on Evan Turner, and Portland has Steph Curry on Mo Harkless in the post, so Turner throws the entry pass, but Zaza drops to help, and Draymond joins him to force the ball out of his hands. Nurkic gets the ball, and Draymond picks him up, but with Steph on the ground, a 3-on-2 advantage is created up top. Pat McCaw recovers, and Klay Thompson is forced to play 2, but Klay's length prevents Dame from making this pass, which gives Draymond just enough time to recover back to CJ, and he tries to attack the paint, but Draymond is able to stay with him, and he also has backline help from Zaza, so CJ is forced to give the ball up, and Draymond tells Klay to switch, so now he has the Dame matchup. But with the shot clock down, there's nothing that they can really do, so Dame is just forced into a tough shot, which he misses. Easily one of the most unbelievable defensive possessions I've ever seen from a single player, and I think it perfectly encapsulates who Draymond Green is on that side of the ball. A player that has an unreal awareness of everything that's happening, a player that is able to lock down guards on the perimeter while also being great at defending players bigger than him, and a player that opposing teams absolutely feared facing during his peak. Other reasons may have played into that, but defensively, there's no denying that after seeing all of this, whether or not you agree with Draymond, you can at least make the case for him being in the conversation for best defender ever. And it's pretty clear to me that in terms of capability and IQ, he is in fact the ultimate modern defender. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I spent a lot of time on it, so I would really appreciate it if you click the like button, subscribe if you're new, hit the bell to be notified when I upload, comment down below what you want to see next, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.